What's up, Team 116? Let's continue our journey through the Bible, where last week we saw that even though David was a man after God's own heart, he wasn't perfect. He had some major flaws, and made what we would consider to be some really big sins. But when confronted about his choices, he repented, and while there was a punishment, God forgave him, as he does with us. David in his old age has now transferred the kingship to his son Solomon, so let's look a bit into how he was as king of God's people. So check out this short clip, and then follow the instructions on the screen, and I'll see you in a bit.
Right before King David died, he told his son Solomon to be strong, follow God's ways, and no matter what, not to worship other gods. Shortly after Solomon took over as king, God appeared to him and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Worried about following in his father's footsteps, Solomon asked God to give him wisdom, to know the difference between right and wrong. God not only promised to give Solomon wisdom, but great riches and honor as well. The first test of Solomon's wisdom happened when two prostitutes came to him. There was a young child that each of them claimed was theirs. Solomon knew one of them had to be lying. So he asked his servants to bring out a sword and suggested to the women that he cut the boy in two and give each of them half. One of the women was so worried that the boy would be killed that she immediately asked Solomon to give the child to the other woman. Solomon saw her love and protection and knew that it had to be her baby, so he gave the boy to her. The Israelites were in awe of Solomon's great wisdom. He ruled for many years, growing in wealth and fame. He also wrote down many wise sayings called Proverbs. During his reign, Solomon planned to finish building the temple his father, David, wanted to build. They built a temple that was not incredibly large, but was unbelievably beautiful and detailed. It was 90 feet by 30 feet and had two bronze pillars that led into the place where sacrifices were made. When it was finished, Solomon and the other leaders sacrificed a huge number of animals in worship to God. When they did, the whole temple filled with a thick cloud of smoke. Solomon prayed, asking God to meet the Israelites in the temple and hear their prayers. When Solomon finished praying, fire came down from the sky and burned up the animal sacrifices. That night, God appeared to Solomon again and promised to bless him in all that he did, as long as he would keep following God. In some areas, Solomon did follow what God told him to, but in others, like worshiping other gods, he failed. Because of this, the kingdom of Israel would be taken from his sons, and they would not enjoy the peaceful, successful reign that he had.
So my See the Story today is a picture of some fool's gold. Kinda looks like real gold, but it captures kind of what's remembered about Solomon and his character, where he looks awesome, looks like he's got everything, but he's not quite all there. So as mentioned, David in his later years transferred his kingship to Solomon, giving him these words to live by. "So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him, and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel." Well, Solomon held true to David's words, even in spite of no temple yet for them to offer proper sacrifices to God. He formed an alliance with the Pharaoh in Egypt, which, if you recall Israel's history with Egypt, was a big deal. He followed God's instructions in his rule. Even without a temple, he offered large sacrifices to God to honor him. And it was during one of his sacrifices that God actually appears to Solomon through a dream. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon answered, "Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Now let's be honest for a moment. How many of us, if told by God to ask for whatever we want him to give us, would ask for the wisdom to lead people?
What is it you want?
I want it all.
I think most would initially ask for things like world peace, diseases to be cured, no one to be left hungry or homeless, no one to be orphaned, maybe even people we loved to be brought back to life to spend more time with them. But look at how much humility Solomon is showing here. He's not even asking for wisdom so that he can become the richest man in the world or know how to conquer the world. He just wants to be able to properly lead God's people to his absolute best. How many of us could use a mindset and heart change to be more like Solomon here? And keep in mind, Solomon was likely around 20 years old when he became king, so not much older than you all. Now, as promised, God blessed Solomon, not only with more wisdom than anyone in the world, but also through peace and wealth. From all nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. 4 years into his reign, as he found peace and his wealth grew, Solomon took on the task of finally building an official permanent temple for God among the people, a task that took 7 years to complete. As he was finally fulfilling what God had said would come to pass regarding the building of a permanent home for him among the people, God gave Solomon this encouragement. The word of the Lord came to Solomon, As for this temple you are building, if you follow my decrees, observe my laws, and keep all my commands and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise I gave to David your father, and I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel. After completing the temple, there was only one thing left to do: bring the Ark of the Covenant to reside in the temple, declaring it officially as God's permanent home on earth among his people. They had a massive festival. And it even says they offered so many sacrifices to God as the ark was brought in that they couldn't be counted or recorded. When the ark was placed and all was set, God's presence came down to reside in the temple as a cloud, prompting Solomon and the people to offer up praises to God. After all the celebration for the temple's completion is over, God again appears to Solomon to remind him that he and Israel will be blessed as long as they stay true to God's commands, but that massive consequences will befall them if they turn away. Now you would think, with as many warnings as God has given Solomon by now, we've read at least 3 of them,
How many times do I have to tell you?
and how dedicated Solomon seemed towards God, that things would go fine with him. But like David, Solomon wasn't perfect, and unfortunately, like Saul, temptations ultimately got the better of him. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. Now while David at least repented when he had given in to temptation and committed his sins, Solomon was led more and more astray, and just kept piling on more and more, which, as you can imagine, didn't sit well with God. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but I will give him one tribe for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." And the very next verse starts this process. "Then the Lord raised up against Solomon an adversary, and God raised up against Solomon another adversary. Also, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, rebelled against the king. He was one of Solomon's officials." Now that last one, Jeroboam, was the big one. He was met by a prophet who passed on God's plan to him, that God was going to make Jeroboam king over almost all of the Israelites, keeping only one of the 12 tribes under Solomon's descendants because of the promise he had made David. "However, as for you, I will take you, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. You will be king over Israel. If you do whatever I command you and walk in obedience to me, and do what is right in my eyes by obeying my decrees and commands, as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and will give Israel to you. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever." And as one final show of where Solomon's heart had fully gone, Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt, to Shishak the king, and stayed there until Solomon's death. And that's the last we read of Solomon until his death, after which his son Rehoboam took over as king, which would lead to some interesting times that we'll get to next week. So Solomon ended up being a human version of fool's gold. Although he looked impressive and looked like he had it all, he didn't keep what made him truly valuable, that heart after God. He showed how easy it is to be deceived by what's not truly valuable. But for a time, he was truly committed to God and to leading the people to God. And I feel like this prayer from Solomon before the entire nation of God's people is a good prayer for us to wrap up our time on Solomon with, and a good prayer for all of us to pray ourselves. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us nor forsake us. May he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him and keep the commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God, and that there is no other. And may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands, as at this time. So now's your time to join the story for this week. So maybe think about and share if you could have God improve one thing about you. What would you choose? What can we do to gain more of God's wisdom, to gain more godly wisdom? And what is that one big area in your life that easily leads you astray, as happened for Solomon and his pursuit of women? This week, let's not be fool's gold. Let's not be led astray, but stay true with God's leading. And I'll catch you on the next part of our journey.